Welcome to the C Analysis podcast. I'm your host, Chaz Nuttycombe, the director of C Analysis. Today, we have a double feature here going on the redistricting process in Ohio and Alaska for state legislative redistricting. Ohio has not put out its congressional maps yet, but looking at the state legislative redistricting, it's probably not going to be good news for Democrats. But we'll touch on that here in a bit. Obviously, Alaska is a at-large district. So there's no congressional redistricting, but they have put out two drafts for the state house. We don't know which districts will be paired yet. And then Ohio has just one draft for each chamber, and they are both brutal Republican gerrymanders. Today, with me, I have Ryan Brune. That's at Brune Elections on election Twitter. He is a resident Ohioan, and I have my resident Alaskan, Robert. Is it Hockema?
Yeah, you got it right.
All right, Robert Hockema. And what was your at on Twitter again, Robert?
At Alaskan Robbie.
All right. Yeah, unfortunately, there's not a whole lot of Alaskan election Twitter. I think there's maybe like one or maybe two or three accounts, and you're one of them. So, you do good work. Ryan, I feel like for people on election Twitter, you don't really need much introduction. People know you, right?
I've been around for a while.
You're an OG. Well, I want to thank the both of you for coming on. You both know your states well. You know your state's politics well, and you've both had the chance to look at the state legislative maps. We have cranked out a forecast for the Ohio maps. So I want to start with Ohio. Ryan, our forecast for the state house in Ohio has Republicans favored to pick up 3 seats in the lower chamber for 2022. And they have a whopping 97% chance of holding their GOP supermajority, and just a 3% chance of losing the majority, or the supermajority, where it gets cracked and becomes a regular majority. There's no chance the Democrats have for even a majority. So, and there's also 3 districts that the Democrats hold, which, even though they voted for Biden, we have as toss-ups. Looking at our forecast, is there anything you disagree with? And when it comes to some of these, I know some of these incumbents have also been drawn out. I believe Jessica Miranda got drawn out of her seat. In Ohio, do you have to live in the district in order to run in it?
I believe the answer to that question is no, but I'm not positive on that. I agree with pretty much everything you have. I could quibble a little bit on a district that you have as tilt Republican. Maybe I think it's tilt Democratic, but overall, in saying that both chambers are strongly favored to have Republican supermajorities, I mean, that's just a fact.
And which is the one that you would quibble with the tilt Republican rating?
Oh, I mean, so for example, in Lake County in northeastern Ohio, there's district, what district is that?
56.
Yeah, 56. I mean, this was a district that, Democrats held on to. It was an open seat in 2020, even as Joe Biden lost it. And, he lost it by quite a bit. It wasn't that close.
Right.
Things can change. In the state Senate, there's a district that's near Akron that you have is very likely Republican, or I believe.
Yeah, very likely Republican.
I mean, it is actually a Biden district. I wouldn't be so pessimistic on Democrats there. They may have a chance. But I mean, in the end, none of this really matters in a grand sense. Republicans are going to maintain supermajorities with these maps in both the lower and upper chamber, and likely by very comfortable margins.
Absolutely. And when it comes to that, the District 56, I do remember you and I talking shortly before the election, talking, because I had it as a toss-up pretty much throughout most of the time for that seat. And I was very surprised. I had it as tilt Republican, and I got it wrong. Democrats held it by like a point. And the thing is, like, I think it got redder in redistricting by a few points, very slightly. But even that, they held it by the skin of their teeth in 2020, and they're going into a midterm currently with a president who is underwater. And so just with that, compared with how the district has gotten a little bit redder, I think red enough to where if this was a district in place last year, that they wouldn't have won it. But I could be wrong on that.
No, also, I'm not 100% positive which one. I would have to double check. But, you know, there's an argument for tilt Republican. But I think the fact that Democrats were able to hold it as an open seat in a year such as 2020, you know, it's very possible. I mean, it's nowhere. I would probably say it's a toss-up. I wouldn't have it at tilt Republican, but
that's fair. And I can get an argument for it. But just when it comes to most Democrats in Trump territory, honestly, I'm definitely, I usually have them as underdogs for 2022. I think it's going to be very hard for Democrats to hold Trump won territory in 2022. But his win was impressive. But yeah, I can definitely see an argument for toss-up. I think the one seat that I'm really interested in is it's the one in Canton, right?
Yeah.
We have it as lean Democrat, and I know you provided us our state legislative calculations for Ohio, and I know that you're talking about how that seat we had is a very, very narrow Trump one seat, but I think DRA may have had it as a very narrow or Vest had it as very narrow Biden. So, but it could either go either way. But regardless, it did get bluer in redistricting. I checked.
So yeah, depending on how you allocate split precincts, the district was so close on the calculations that it could end up either way. You know, the long run for Democrats in this district is disastrous. They may hold it in 2022, but I would be shocked in 2030 if they still held it. You know, that's a lot of industry. Well, they used to have a lot of industry, had something of a black core, but a lot of the African Americans are leaving or have left to larger, more prosperous cities. I mean, the trend line for Democrats in Canton and Northeastern Ohio in general is, you know, apocalyptic or something.
Yeah, I would absolutely agree that I think the Canton seat is going to flip by the end of the decade. Well, let me switch over to Alaska before we get into the processes for each of these states. Robbie, there are two plans in the Alaska House, and both of them have made the House more Republican. You have the first draft and you have the second draft. And we were talking a little bit about this before the podcast. You think that the first draft is going to be more likely to be what the final product looks like, which has two more Biden districts than what the second draft has. So I'm kind of curious and tempted to try and launch a forecast with those seats just to see what it would look like, even though obviously it's not going to be the final thing. Talk a little bit about the two drafts, the main differences between them. And I know you've pointed out how there have been a lot of incumbents, particularly Democratic incumbents, who have been paired together.
Yeah, so broadly, both of the maps do a couple of the same things. The main differences are in how Anchorage, which is the state's largest city by far, casts about 49% of the presidential vote and is about 49% of the state's population. But everywhere else, it kind of does very, very similar things. It makes Representative Ortiz's Ketchikan district a lot more conservative. It pulls interior villages out of native majority districts and into this gigantic, if you've ever looked at the Alaska map, this gigantic interior Delta Valdez district. It also adds some Republican-leaning areas and precincts to Representative Wool's Fairbanks district, like Salcha and Eielson, which is the military base. So the differences then are in kind of how you draw Anchorage. So in the first map, as you mentioned, pairs a whole bunch of Democratic incumbents into the same districts and forces them into runoffs. It's a generally more favorable map to Democrats in terms of how the districts lean, but it forces essentially 4 to 5 incumbents into retirement. The most insidious is most definitely the downtown Turnagain districts, which forces 3 incumbents into the same district. It's pretty blatant. The Juneau district even gets broken up in both maps as well. I want to go back real quick. The Juneau districts go back and put Representative Story and Representative Hannon, the only 2 Juneau representatives, into the same district, and they even draw a square around Representative Andy Story's house. We call that the Kawasaki finger in Alaska because Kawasaki, who is a Democratic senator from up in Fairbanks, had a very same thing done to him, except the Redistricting Commission made a mistake and did it to his relative instead. So now they've successfully done it to Representative Andy Story. So it's very blatant here. And the reason the first one is more preferable to Dems is because there are just a lot more competitive seats the Democrats could capture. There's 9 solidly Dem seats in the first map and 16 solidly GOP seats and 15 competitive seats. And in the second version, there are only 11 competitive seats, and 21 of them of the seats are solidly GOP. So that's kind of how the partisan breakdowns work. Because Anchorage is moving so far left so quickly, and by that I mean every single Anchorage House district, with the exception of a high Democratic leaning Mountain View district, moved significantly to the left between 2016 and 2020, including some of the more conservative districts. So there's only so much you can do to kind of outpace the changes that are happening, but they do their best by just eliminating incumbents to try and beat. So, yeah.
And when I remember looking at the map, there are 2 Republicans that are with the majority coalition. You got Louise Stutes, who is in the southern parts of Alaska. It touches various rural parts.
Kodiak, Cordova, and Soldovia.
Yeah, right. And then you've got the other Republican. What's her name?
The other Republican. Well, there's actually 3 Republicans in the House minority. The second one is
no, you mean the House majority?
The House majority. Yeah, no, there's 3 Republicans in the House majority. The Stutes, who is the Speaker of the House, Representative Merrick, who represents a conservative Eagle River Chugiak State Park district, and then the third is oh no, never mind. There's only 2.
Yeah, that's what I thought. I think one of them, another Republican, doesn't caucus with either party.
Rasmussen.
So, yeah. So yeah, that's the one. She doesn't caucus with either party. But the other one, yeah, in Eagle River, she is still in that seat, and it's gotten more Republican. And I think in a primary, I think that may be an intentional, because in a primary, I think she would be pretty much dead. Looking at how the Alaska House primaries from last time in 2020, it's not in a primary. It's not favorable for Republican primary voters. So I think they did that to her to give her a harder time at winning. Would you agree with that?
I definitely would. And if it weren't for ranked choice voting, she'd be dead in the primary regardless, right. Because her district's GOP party essentially expelled her. They said, we're going to back whoever challenges you. You violated the will of the people and lied to us because you joined the Democratic-led coalition. So she'd be kind of screwed either way. But this is going to be really hard for her.
Yeah. Well, let's talk about the both of these states have commissions, but let's go with Ohio first. Ryan, so help explain the commission. These lines are going to have to be redrawn in 2024, you said, in the state legislative maps, and I assume it's going to be the congressional maps as well. Why is that?
So let's just take one step back. So in Ohio, because of an amendment that was passed in 2015 by the voters, there's an Ohio Redistricting Commission composed of 7 members: the governor, the auditor, secretary of state, and 4 members of the General Assembly appointed by the minority leaders and the majority leaders. And they basically have until this Wednesday, the 15th, to approve a map. And in order to approve the map, you need at least 2 members from every party and a majority of the 7. So you need 4 of 7, and you need 2 Democrats. There's a very strong chance that no map is going to be agreed on by the 15th, Republicans will push through their map on a simple majority, which will be allowed after the 15th. But in that case, the map only lasts for 4 years, very unique to Ohio. And there's a similar mechanism for the congressional maps, which are due on the 30th of September, a little bit later.
And so those will also only be able to be used for 4 years, correct?
Yeah, correct. I think Ohio is the only state in the country that has a system like this where there's a constitutional mechanism to only have the maps last for 4 years.
I think you would be right. So what happens in 4 years then? Is it the same people drawing it, or?
Oh, I mean, if they honestly may just pass the exact same maps again. They could totally do that.
So so they're just gonna. I mean, if anything, they can make him even more brutal based on
sure.
Looking at the new data. What
4 more
happens.
years.
So they redraw this in 2025.
Yeah, I mean, so there's a few considerations. I mean, extremely unlikely, but Democrats could maybe flip the governor, the auditor, the secretary of state. Pretty unlikely, but maybe. But another avenue is it's fairly easy to get a constitutional amendment on the ballot in Ohio. Democrats may try to get a stronger a redistricting commission that would have to lead more credence to the minority, like give them more power and not being able to be override.
And so they would probably have to get that done on the ballot by 2024. So if they were able to do that, get an amendment through, when they have to redraw these lines, are they going to have to go with that? If they get a stronger amendment, that'll make it so that the GOP can't gerrymander.
Yeah. So it's not exactly this is what Democrats would like to think. It's not a guarantee that the amendment would pass. You have to get 10% of the total number of people that voted in the last gubernatorial election to sign a petition to get the amendment. That's not the easiest thing. It's happened, in the past for, a marijuana amendment that actually ended up failing. There's going to be another one of those, I suppose, next year. But it's not a certain deal. Democrats may be better off just challenging the maps in court, but it is an avenue.
Okay. And so it would go to the state Supreme Court, right?
Yeah. So the Supreme Court of Ohio has original jurisdiction over all matters relating to redistricting. So presumably the court would actually hear challenges pretty quickly by the end of this year before primaries would happen. But Republicans can...
Before the end of this year?
Yeah.
Okay. And the Ohio Supreme Court, its makeup, or rather the critical votes on the Supreme Court, would like to see a fair map, correct?
Well, maybe. The Ohio Supreme Court has 4 Republicans and 3 Democrats on it. There is a swing vote on the Supreme Court it's possible that they would argue. I mean, the constitutional amendment passed in 2015 says the maps can't unduly favor one party.
Which these clearly do.
Yeah, they clearly do. But I suppose it's an open question whether or not the courts would accept that argument. Republicans are starting to develop an argument basically saying, in order to meet the other requirements of this amendment, aka not splitting counties too many times, not splitting municipalities too many times, partisan fairness is impossible. And I would say that's not correct, but it is possible that they could use that argument in the Supreme Court to not get the maps tossed.
Right. All right. Well, I think that's a pretty ample explanation with the process in Ohio. Robbie, let's touch on Alaska. There is a commission in Alaska, and you have, let's see if I got this correctly. You got one person on the commission appointed by the governor, another by the Speaker of the House. I want to say it's 2 on the state Supreme Court, and then 1 by the Secretary of State. Is that right?
Just flip the Supreme Court and the governor. The governor appoints 2. Chief Justice of the Supreme Court appoints 1. Speaker of the House appoints 1. You got everything else right, though.
Okay. And there's only 1 Democrat on the commission. I'm guessing that's the one that Stutes appointed?
This is actually the one that was appointed by Representative Bryce Edgman, who represents a Native majority district in the Aleutians in Bristol Bay. He was Speaker of the House at the time, which was a pretty historic position for him to hold. But so that's when the Redistricting Commission got appointed, which was in August of 2020, while we still had him.
Gotcha. I knew it had been by the Speaker, but then I was kind of thinking, I mean, the Duke's just kind of still appointed Democrat, but no, that makes more sense. Yeah, and he temporarily
he was a Democratic turned independent.
Yeah, well, no, he's back to being a Democrat now, to the best of my knowledge. I think he switched back. He became an independent when he became Speaker. I think that was kind of the agreement they reached. But I think now he switched back to being a Democrat. But anyway,
I didn't know that.
So so what is the timeline? I think it's by November 20th that a final map is supposed to be adopted, correct?
Yeah. So we're heading into third party plans, which they have this redistricting tool that's pretty cool, developed by like Harvard, where you can draw your own districts and submit them, and you can actually present them live to the board on the 17th, which is this Friday. The deadline to draw them up is the 15th. And then the 21st, they adapt additional draft plans. Then there's this in-between meeting that we don't know about yet. And then November 10th is the adoption of the final plan as per the current schedule, which is earlier than we were expecting it, but they say they're going to get it done.
Okay. And so are there going to be any more drafts that are drawn by the commission that are going to be coming up here soon within the next month or so?
I think so. I think these two drafts are going to get significant feedback. Certainly if I have anything to do about it, but lots of people are kind of paying attention. Redistricting is in the eyes of more people than it was during the last cycle for sure.
Right.
So I think they're going to have to reconcile it. They've already had to make an update actually to the current two draft maps they proposed. There was an issue with Ketchikan and how it was being split off. And it was one of those blatant packing two incumbents into the same district sort of thing. And they said, oh, no, that's a mistake. Didn't really seem like a mistake. So I think that's example one of many that they're going to have to revert off of the next maps. So
did they release that updated one with the Ketchikan, the redraw on that?
Yeah, the shape files that are available, as well as the interactive, reflect it, and they also released like a press update. Okay, I can send you that if you'd like.
Yeah, that'd be great. And did Ketchikan get, when they updated this, did it get a little bit more bluer, I'm guessing?
So what they did was they split the lower half of Ketchikan's kind of hard to explain, but they split the lower half of Ketchikan, which is Saxman, which is the only native majority or really native community on the island, and then Mountain Point. Both of those areas are where Representative Ortiz lives. And he's represented Ketchikan for a minute now. He's incredibly popular.
Right.
But if he weren't there, it'd be a Republican representative. So the district is nominally Republican, and then they drew it to make it more Republican and disincluded him from the Ketchikan district. And then they said, oops, that was a mistake. And then they drew in the entirety of Ketchikan back in.
Okay, great. Yeah, he's yeah, I think he's still heavily favored in that seat, even though it's gotten more conservative.
Oh yeah, he overperformed Biden by 35%. He'll be fine.
Yeah, so he's and he's an independent. He's not a Democrat, but he still is with the majority coalition.
Yeah, he's very moderate, really respectable guy. He's incredibly popular.
Yeah, he's very, very popular. One of the few kind of state legislators there are who can really outrun. Well, I wouldn't even say outrun, because again, he's an independent, but Alaska is it's one of my favorite states because it's got really weird politics, weird election results. For example, that guy well, let me ask you, I guess, last question here, because I think we've talked on the processes. House District 40, that's the one in the northern slope. How would you say that? Do you think he is safe? Are the Democrats going to get someone to run against him?
Do you mean Pakkatak, the independent representative?
Yeah.
Oh, it's really hard to say. It's a very difficult district to predict, especially lately. Elizabeth Ferguson was a really good candidate, and I'm a little bit surprised she didn't win. But if you are a Democrat, you have to be pretty supportive of development, and you have to be pretty supportive of Anwar. And it's really hard to win an election up there if you're not. And I suspect that's why the district swung against the Democrats and back towards Trump after this election. And it's the district that did so the most, and that's because it's, Anwar and environmental development became such a focus of the presidential election this time. So, a Democrat is going to try, and they certainly could win. The Democrats have represented the district before. But I don't think those partisan differences play out in Native Alaska the way they do in urban Alaska. Native majority districts have the highest proportion of nonpartisan voters compared to partisan voters, compared to anywhere else in the state. And every single member from each of those 4 districts have always caucused with whoever is the majority. It doesn't matter if they've been Republican dominated. It's just you have to have that leverage, and you have to be at the table, or else things sort of fall apart in rural Alaska. So it's very hard to say.
And he's with the majority coalition.
Yes, he is.
So I mean, the thing is, when I'm thinking of making a forecast with it, I guess I would put it as like safe independent / Democrat, because it doesn't seem like a regular conservative Republican is really going to either even run in that district, to the best of my knowledge.
I would listen to, if you ever want to understand the bit better the politics of District 40 to the best of your ability. There's a really cool podcast called Coffee with Quack. And so I might be mispronouncing that last name, but they had a District 40 forum, and both Elizabeth Ferguson, the Democrat, and the Independent, agreed on lots and lots of things, and most of them sounded pretty democratically oriented. They both talked about the effects of racism. They both talked about funding PCE, which is power cost equalization. I mean, all of it sounded like House coalition talking points. And it was just essentially two Democrats running against each other. One of them was just a lot more conservative, and that's still relative to the district's voting habits. So
yeah, I definitely like to check out that podcast. You'll have to definitely send it to me. All right. Well, I want to thank the both of you for coming on. I think we've given the listeners a very informative episode on both the processes for redistricting in these states, and also what these maps are looking like now. I will try and get a Alaska House forecast out with the former plan, the one that's better for Democrats, because I know you said that was going to be the one that's more likely to be used, because I'm just itching to get these forecasts out. I love going through it. I've already got ratings for that done. And if the Ketchikan district didn't really change much in partisanship, I'm sure my rating for that, I would still have it as like likely independent. I would probably hold the same rating. So yeah, thank you both for coming on.
Thank you for having us.
Yeah, thank you.